What really got me interested in this camera and the entire GFX line from the start was first and foremost the size of the sensor. I noticed firsthand with larger film formats that they do have some image characteristics that you just have to see for yourself to understand. I shot a ton of large and medium format film and never lost my affinity for the image quality. So I was really excited when the GFX cameras were announced. The first one I tried was the 50R. I'd say still-wise, it's still my favorite, and ergonomically-wise, it was my favorite until this camera. I loved using the 50R to shoot stills with, but the video features were really lacking, so I also tried the GFX 100. Each time I was really amazed at the still image quality, especially with that 100 megapixel sensor. I don't usually change my composition by cropping in. However, every little chunk of the 100 megapixel sensors are usable. You can crop in as much as 60 to 75%, and there's still a nice image there. However, the lack of professional video features and recording capabilities made me sell them off. It came down to I just couldn't justify keeping basically what was a really nice stills camera. As far as the body goes, this is one of my all-time favorite cameras for how it feels in my hand. Whatever the material is that's used on the exterior of this camera is just phenomenal, and it feels like it was made by astronauts who quit the space program to make camera bodies. The EVF, which has 9 million dots, is noticeably better than any other mirrorless camera's EVF I've ever used. It's big, bright, and clear. I really like the tilt adapter made for the EVF. I'm 6'5", and my kids are 2'5" and 3'5", and when I'm trying to get photos and videos of them, it's nice to not have to bend over backwards. It also swivels. It allows you to still have that third point of contact when you're shooting video. Unfortunately, the tilted cage that I have for this camera doesn't allow you to use the adapter because it's fitted around the EVF. In general, I find the Fuji menu system easy to navigate. There's also enough custom buttons that combined with the Q or quick menu, I really only have to go into the menu system to find some obscure setting every now and then. I also love this little top status screen, which can either show you the normal useful information, or with the push of a button, it can show you a histogram. I love this, and now that I've used it, I want it on all the other cameras that I have. The one thing that I did feel like was missing from this camera was the ability to have the electric shutter cover the image sensor when the camera is off and you're switching lenses. If you've ever had to try and fix a video shot with a lot of movement that has distracting dust spots, you'll understand my frustration with not all cameras having this. Especially these big GFX cameras, which have noticeably more surface area for dust to get on. When the Mark II was announced, I was really excited to see Fuji had stepped up the video specs, adding internal 10-bit ProRes HQ up to 60 frames per second, using the full width of the sensor. With the release of the H2S, Fuji added F-Log2. It's hard for me to judge the quality of F-Log1 because you could only record 8-bit H.264 HD on the 50R and 10-bit 4K H.265 on the 100. The first time I shot video on this camera, I was immediately impressed with the tonal range and colors when first looking through the EVF and then grading them on a big monitor. There is also a dynamic range switch that basically allows you to have one more stop of dynamic range or better rolling shutter performance. This camera won Camera of the Year over at CineD, and CineD has some great scientific instruments and testing procedures that measure things like dynamic range, rolling shutter performance, and noise levels. They also make little short documentaries using the cameras to test battery life and ergonomics, overall usability. To me, that says quite a lot on just how far the GFX video capability has come. Right around the time I got my hands on this camera, I discovered a RAW converter which allowed you through the process of converting ProRes RAW footage to Cinema DNG, you can edit and grade it in Resolve. From using Blackmagic cameras through the years, I have really come to appreciate the flexibility in color grading RAW video files. It's one of those things that might seem like a luxury or overkill, but now that I've used it in my work, I really don't like not having it. I'm actually optimistic because Fuji, similar to Panasonic, has a good track record of adding functionality through firmware updates. They have really improved the IBIS on this camera. There's a lot of situations where I love to shoot handheld, but with those previous models I didn't feel comfortable. The combination of the improved IBIS and using the wonderful EVF as a third point of contact makes this camera one of my favorite to shoot handheld with. The first feature films I got to work on were documentaries, And while you never want to rely strictly on autofocus, it's nice to have because unlike stuff shot in a controlled studio environment, you don't have a focus puller or the ability to ask someone to redo a scene. The AI subject tracking was one of the first things that I was really impressed by. I always test subject tracking AF out on my kids because there's nothing logic to what they do. And I have to say I was really impressed with how this camera did. When using autofocus outside of the AI modes, it seemed to attain the focus on the subject that I wanted without much time hunting around like the previous models. From the little testing I did with wildlife, birds in this case, I thought it was actually pretty good. There are some things to consider when potentially moving to this mount. First off, if you're brand new to medium format, or you're like me and it's been quite a while since you used one, you should be aware that since we're increasing the sensor size, there's a 0.79 crop on the focal length if you want to have an idea of what field of view you'll get from a given focal length. And as far as cine lenses go, there is a good amount of PL and EF lenses that have a 45mm image circle. But I decided to go with the dual lens APO mini primes after trying them out. They're built really well, they're compact, and I love the image they make. I was able to find adapters for both PL and EF lenses with built-in Vari-ND, which is always my preferred way of adding neutral density to a camera that doesn't have it built in. All things considered, this is by far the best GFX camera. It's truly a joy to use, and it's obvious this was a passion project for the Fuji Gfx design team. They improved nearly everything that was lackluster on the previous editions of the camera, and they package it in one of the best ergonomic and functional camera bodies that I've ever used. This camera took some big steps from the initial GFX offerings. Big enough that this camera can create better video than a lot of the cinema cameras on the market right now, at the same time retaining its amazing still image capabilities. I'm personally optimistic that sometime in the near future, either this camera or the next iteration will get internal RAW video, potentially a global shutter mode that lets us use that big old sensor, which would instantly become the choice for people asked for both horizontal and vertical deliverables at high resolutions. And the last thing I'll mention is that with Nikon's acquisition of Red, Fuji now is the only major camera that does not have a cinema camera. If they were going to release something that had a GFX sensor with a global shutter and a cinema body with proper connections and long battery life, I think it would convince more and more people to invest in the GFX bodies in glass. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.